Hello and welcome to another episode of How to Start, Grow and Monetise Your Podcast with me, James Burt, and the podpreneur himself, Alex Chisnell. Today on the pod, we are doing a listener and a Pod School Pro member Q&A special. I know I've just chucked a load of words at you there, but basically we asked people online to chuck us some questions, and we've had a few in, which have got some very good podcast-related questions. And you're not only going to be able to hear us read them out, which we're going to in a couple of instances, you're going to be able to hear the listener.
Amazing.
That's right. The listener is dialed in. I've actually even done a little video on how you can make clips off things like Instagram work through an audio desk, because a lot of time if you watch podcasts, they just play it through the phone, which you can do. But we wanted to take it one step further.
Do they call you Harry Potter?
They should do. They should do.
Magician.
Well, I've been called worse.
Wizard.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Rhymes with wizard.
I think my wife calls me a wizard. It starts with a W, definitely. No, it's not wizard, actually.
No, it's not a W word.
Right.
It is a W word, though.
So let's start by... Should we have what would you fancy, in fact? Let's play it. Would you rather a listener question, like an audio question, or a written question? We're playing today's classic game, audio or written?
Audio.
Audio. Great choice. Here comes the first.
Let us know how long
Oh, no, hang on a second.
Oh, amateur
podcast has
wizard.
got to...
Oh, it's playing already. Hang on, I'll have to...
Amateur wizard.
We'll go for a different one. So here is our first question.
Hi, the question that I want to ask any guest of yours in your podcast is, what drives you to start this business or whatever you are doing now? What is the main drive that make you think you want to do this and make you persist to continue until you made it and succeed in it?
Thank you,
Hi,
listener Malika.
the question...
Oh, God. It's all going Pete Tong, isn't it? I've never used this flipping desk before. I love the Rodecaster Pro Original. I do not like number 2 because of things like that.
Workman blames the tools.
Yes, supposedly. So that's from listener Malika. Thank you for listening. Much appreciated. I think she might have misunderstood the brief slightly in that she thought I had a very exciting and powerful guest. I don't. I've just got you rocking up at 4 o'clock, having driven across the entire country to get here. Story for another day. But so what was your, when you first got started with the podcast? I know we've mentioned it on previous episodes, but when you started Screw It, Just Do It, what was that catalyst to you going, I'm actually, ironically, just going to screw it, just do it?
Yeah, I think for me it was listening to a podcast, which I've alluded to before, how I built this, and thinking not necessarily that I could do a better job, but it was just like, wow,
that is fighting talk. Guy Raz will fly over
will roast me.
And will roast you big time.
It wasn't that. It was. This is amazing. I want to do it. How can I do it? It's like, I want to get involved. How can I do it? And I just thought I could add a different flavor, a different spin on what he was doing ultimately. And, again, like you, my background was radio, and I just thought, okay, I like that. I can see myself transitioning into this. Again, it's empowering. It gives you a voice. And I just jumped straight in.
Yeah, nice.
Unlike you that waited 5 years.
5 years later. Do you know what the catalyst for me starting the podcast was, or one of the reasons why I thought there's a point of difference and a place in the market? There's lots of good, I say lots of good shows, there's definitely less good shows then than there is now, but they were all American voices.
Correct.
They were all brilliantly put together shows, but every single big podcast at the time, you had Gary Vee was doing the Gary Vee audio experience, which I think he's still doing now. Tim Ferriss, Lewis Howes, all of the big hitters were in America. There wasn't any UK voices at all. So that's when I was like, I would love to hear these sorts of conversations, but with a British slant on it. So I think there's a clue here for the listener or the watcher in that, you can do your thing in your way for your specific niche and target market. No one can do it the way that you're going to do it, and no one can necessarily speak to your ideal target market in the way that you want to. And even if there's already content that's similar to what you're planning to do out there, you can bring a unique perspective to that. So don't be afraid to find your point of difference and then create this podcast.
Well, that's the USP, isn't it? Ultimately, we are all created differently. None of us are exactly the same, even if we are conjoined twins. Therefore, I have no idea where I'm going with this one.
Wow. I can't wait till you cycle back to this. Fine.
Next question.
We will have a written question next. My God, I might have to feed you those energy drinks again. Right, this one came from one of our Pod School Pro members. Now, this podcast is brought to you by Pod School. You can go and join. It's a free community for podcasters. There is training in there. There's Q&As. There's questions. There's an amazing community. There's people who are launching their podcast, asking questions in there, etc. For those that want to accelerate their journey and go that little bit quicker, then there is Pod School Pro, which is a premium community. Effectively, gets more one-to-one support from us. It gets more training, etc. So this is from one of our members, Jonathan, and he asked about attracting dream sponsors. Any tips on monetizing your podcast? I want to attract top brands that I'd be proud to have on the podcast rather than small and tacky organisations. Don't put any punches, Jonathan. Rather than small and tacky organisations that don't reflect the brand of what I'm trying to portray with the podcast. Thanks, Jonathan. What's your take on that one, Shiznell?
I think my take on that one is going to be, to start with, is literally write down what brands do you aspire to work with. We know people, myself included, who have ultimately ended up working with our dream brands. My case, Virgin Atlantic, I was with Pod School Pro member Rob Hanna last night, who has his dream sponsor for his Legally Speaking podcast. So it's like, it can happen, people. This isn't something that, is make-believe. You can literally land your dream sponsor. But guess what you got to do? First of all, you literally need to write down a list of who you would like to work with. Next thing you need to do is you need to work out how can you open up a conversation with those brands, okay? Yeah. And to open up that conversation, you also need to be prepared. Have a deck ready, showing them ultimately what they want to hear. If you were in charge of that brand, what would you want to know about that podcast? What can they offer your brand? Who can they reach ultimately? In what way, shape, or form can they reach it? So for me, it's something that is achievable, and I'm only speaking about that because I have done it. Would I like to work with other dream sponsors? Yes, I would. Let's not sugarcoat it. It becomes a job to do that, because it's a difficult thing to do. Yeah, you're aspiring to work with your dream brand, so you don't have to. You might not necessarily expect to land them literally tomorrow, but you can build up to that. And that's not me saying you have to work with tacky brands to get there, but you could still work with fantastic brands to get there. But start, small, but you can still start those conversations. And you may have seen this as well. People change jobs. People that you're in your network and you're having conversations with, next thing you know, they've got their head of marketing job at, I don't know, off the top of my head, Levi Strauss. Do you know what I mean? Whereas before they were working for, I don't know, Abdul and Smith Butchers down the road. Okay, that's a bit of a reach, isn't it?
What? The marketing manager from Abdul and Smith Butchers has now become the brand director of Levi Strauss. I'm glad I waited till 4 o'clock for you to turn up. You might as well have not turned up, frankly. You are cooked, mate. You're going down the road for a chicken sheesh, an emergency chicken sheesh. But I think...
chicken sheesh.
I'm going to phone him up now. We need an emergency sheesh. But I think you make a good point, loosely, with Rob, because he didn't just go and get a dream sponsor. His content is crafted exactly for that dream sponsor. Now, obviously, he hasn't made it specifically for that brand and business, but he is speaking. So Rob, for those that don't know, is a member of our Pod School Pro Academy, and he is in the legal recruitment space, and he has got $1 billion company that pays him very handsomely for the sponsorship of his podcast, because it is the biggest podcast in that niche. Now, again, the point of this being, he didn't specifically make that podcast just going, oh, I'm going to go after XYZ brand, but he knew starting out that there's only going to be brands like that's going to resonate with. Now, if Jonathan, for example, has already got a podcast up and running, it doesn't make sense. Let's say something really random, but it's not Abdul and Smith Butchers. Let's say, for example, his dream sponsor would be, the supplement brands like you've had on, that you're a big fan of. But it made sense for them to sponsor you because you're talking about fitness and wellness. You got peak performance on your podcast. You'd run the marathon. You were training for the New York Marathon, etc., etc. But for example, if Jonathan was going after a supplement brand, it makes sense to start crafting content at least, not even if it's not the entire show, but content at least that resonates with that
100%.
that audience.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're trying to get Barclays, then you need to potentially be speaking to small businesses, or look at what their content cycle is at the moment. Look at what PR they're putting out. Look at what advertising they're starting to run.
I landed them as well.
You did land them as well. That's why I thought I'd bring it up, because then people are like, who's this butcher guy? But he landed. I know. I'm thinking it as well, guys. But he's landed in Virgin in Barclays, so he can't be that much of an idiot. Shout out to Abdul and some butchers down the road. But realistically, you could start to craft the content that you know is going to resonate with that brand. For example, if you're talking about, I don't know, like military history at one end of the podcasting sphere, you're not going to get Barclays at the other end of it, if that makes sense. You need to start crafting the content your sponsor is likely to want to hear.
Yeah, and then get it in front of them.
And then get it in front of them, yeah. And I think one of the key things, and I've sort of touched on it there, look at what they're currently doing. Look at what they are doing in terms of advertising. Look at what they're doing in terms of PR. Look at where, if you, for example, let's go down the route with the Barclays. You can walk past a Barclays branch and there will be posters in the windows which will be giving you signals and signs of what it is that they are trying to push right now. It might be mortgages, it might be saving in the new year, it might be retirements. You'll see that in posters in the window. You could also look online, and if you go onto anyone's website, chances are they're going to cookie you and then they're going to follow you around the internet. So look at those Facebook and those Instagram and those TikTok ads that follow you around the internet. Also, top secret hack here. If you go onto Facebook or to Meta, you can go onto a business's page. If you click onto About on the page, if you then click Page Transparency, you can literally see all of the adverts that they are running right now. So if, for example, you're after
I forgot about that one. That's a good one.
It's a good I remember that, isn't it?
I've done that back in the day.
And then you can find out what they are literally going after right now, and then you can make content that is crafted towards that audience. Now, again, that is not to say, Barclays are doing a big push on ISAs right now, I'm going to start doing loads of ISA content, you're definitely going to land them. That's not how the world works, but it makes sense to at least be curating and creating content that resonates with the messaging that they're trying to put across. And by the way, big brands, every quarter they will change their messaging slightly. Correct. There will be an overarching theme of, it'll be quite obvious who they're trying to go after. The other thing you could do is go into the page transparencies, look at all the adverts, copy and paste all the copy, and then say who, and stick it into Mr. Jupiter, aka ChatGPT, and say, who is this brand ultimately trying to target? And then you could reverse engineer your content again. So then you can go to Barclays and go, hey, we're doing this thing, we reach this audience, etc.
Yeah, and also it's a good point. I remember specifically doing this is when you do get that door cranked open for you to go and have that conversation with them, because you are producing content that they might be interested in investing in. You've actually done your research and you can see what campaigns that quarter they're actually launching, because you're right, next quarter it will change again. But for the moment, this is, the posters in the windows, these are the targeted ads, this is the copy on the website. You can do your due diligence before you go in, and you can literally make that part of the conversation. I can see you doing this. We've covered this on episode or this is coming up in the next quarter.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you do that? And you're not trying to make it as easy as possible, I suppose, by kind of sucking up to them any way, shape, or form. But you're literally trying to make it as attractive an opportunity as possible. Yeah. And if the audience ticks the box, the content ticks the box, you just need to open the door and have that conversation. And again, it comes back to something we've mentioned many, many times before. Look at your network, but look at, 2 people removed from your network who can give you an introduction to somebody in that space. The head of marketing, the director of marketing, the head of partnerships, the director of sponsorships. You have to get a little bit creative sometimes with the size of the firm, the person you actually need to speak to. But there are amazing tools out there, like if you use like Apollo and stuff like that, will literally pull out all of the emails of those companies that you're looking to attract.
I've never heard of Apollo.
Yeah, Apollo 9.
Apollo. You're off to space again, aren't you? So you can sort of data scrape effectively to get their email addresses.
Yeah. Right. And you can get again, some of them will do that where you literally will go on LinkedIn and it will literally, pull out their email from their LinkedIn profile, that kind of thing. And you're like, again, is one of those things where it becomes a numbers game, because only so many people are going to answer that cold email, etc. Which is why I always say, try those first connections first of all. Who else do you know that might know someone at Barclays that can pass you on to someone in marketing, and yada, yada, yada.
I think just one final thing for Jonathan specifically, I would also look at small, and I use that term intentionally, smaller podcast advertising or sponsorship networks. They will exist out there. I've got a relationship with a couple of them. I won't mention them by name because then they'll probably get inundated with people reaching out to them directly. But just reach out to those networks and say, hey, this is my show. Again, you've got to do your homework. This is my show. This are the numbers we're getting. This is the audience we've reached. This is the content we're creating. These are the episodes we've done recently. These are the sorts of guests that we've got coming on. Do all of that kind of work and then go to that sponsorship network and say, we are looking to start to monetize our content. We'd love to know if you've got any partners that would see value in speaking to the audience that we've already created. And that's the spin here that you need to have, I think, when you're reaching out to brands or sponsorship organizations. You've already got this network. You've already got this audience. You've already got this community of people. You know, so many brands this year in 2024 going into 2025. You know, community. It's like the buzzword of right now. But if you've already got a listening audience.
We've got one.
And we have got one. But we've got a genuine community. So if you can sell the benefit of that to people, I think you're in a good space. Right, let's do another quick fire audio question.
Afternoon, James. Afternoon, Alex. You pair of legends. My question is to finding your niche within a niche, which I'm hearing is something that is a very good idea from everything you've shared recently. So, for example, in a broad category like self-improvement, would you say it's better long-term to try and find a niche within that area? Something like building mental resilience by doing hard things and finding your purpose to overcome your challenges, hurdles, mental wellness, all in a wanna, but trying to find like a niche area rather than trying to cater for the whole of self-improvement and making that too broad. Hope that makes sense. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so that is listener Ollie, all the way from, I don't know where, just like sounded like radio then.
Devon. Shame on you.
Sorry,
shame on you.
Did not know. I knew it was somebody on a cliff top because at one point he sent us a video of him on a cliff top doing a walk.
Yeah. Forensic.
This is your new thing, isn't it? You've got hyped on the word forensic, haven't you? Go on then, use it. Okay. Use it in context.
Thank you. Let me use it. So, 100%, self-improvement, great category, super competitive category.
They self-help, all are now, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. So you want to go subcategory. You want to drop down a niche, drop down another niche. I don't think you can get too niche. How many people do you need for this podcast to be successful? You don't need it to be the obvious examples of podcasts we've just mentioned, the Gary V's, the Lewis Howes, the Tim Ferrisses. Do you really need a podcast that's going to be getting, 7-figure number, 6 figures? Yeah, it's great, but do you need that to make your podcast successful? I don't think you do. So get forensic, and all that means is like literally dialing in to something so specific that your audience is ultimately going to find you rather than you trying to find your audience, because they are searching online, they're Googling for doing hard things and building resilience, for example. That would be fantastic.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be a great show title.
That'd be a great show. And I can think of shows that I like that kind of stuff is referenced. The Andy Frizellas of this world did 75 Hard and things like that. There can be loads of podcasts that put a British spin on it, put a Devonian spin on it.
Yeah, I like it. And like you've said, I think you're quite right. You can't go too niche. Too niche doesn't exist. I thought, we've as an agency, we looked after a show which was about ground investigation recruitment for the deep piling industry. I mean, that's a niche and a niche and a niche and a niche and a niche. And that was getting sub 1,000, just under 1,000 listens per month, which you might go, well, what's the point of doing it? But that guy could only wanted to speak to, there's 25 companies that could potentially ever work with this dude in the country because it's so hyper niche. And 23 out of the 25 of them he had touched base with about coming on the podcast within the first 6 months. That was the box tick. And to your point, it's a great article called 1,000 True Fans.
Yeah.
Yes, from an ego perspective, maybe you want the Joe Rogan, the Lewis Howes, the Tim Ferriss style numbers, but you absolutely don't need it. And if you've got a niche audience of 1,000 people who listen to your podcast, Can you convert 10% of those to be in your community? Can you convert 10% of those to have coaching, mentoring, consultancy with you? Depends on your outcome. What does podcast success look like for you, of course? But I think you don't need to go broad. I think it's actually easier to go niche of niche to start with, and you can broaden out thereafter. Once you've got a tribe, a community, a reputation, an audience, people and a fan base, people that will follow you to different places, you can expand out from there. Again, I'm going to have to put a pound in the swear jar, but Diary of a CEO started as a, I've got no cat. Do you take chip and pin? You take anything today. You don't know what day of the week is. But Diary of a CEO started with
Buy me a coffee.
Stephen Bartlett underneath the staircase in his flat in Manchester, talking about like what had happened that week in his business while he was still running this marketing agency thing that he ran. Now Social Chain, that's the one. This week he's been talking about like the dangers of wax candles with toxicologists. It's like, really? he's gone broader and broader and broader, and then you might niche it down again. So I would say start super niche. To Ollie's point as well, if you just go generalized self-help, you are swimming against the tide there in terms of getting found, because there's just so much competition out there, and also established competition. That's not to say that you can't go in and make waves in your own space, but you've got to define the space more carefully than just self-help, in my opinion.
And the last point I'll make on that is, you just alluded to it there as well. It comes down to what does podcast success look like for you? And part of that might be, I don't need an audience of thousands of people, because what I want to be doing is interviewing people as my guests in my space, who are the people I actually want to take on as clients. As an example, making it up, I'm a coach who works with CEOs of blue chip companies. Let me interview CEOs of blue chip companies and find out, where their pain points are and where their challenges are. And at the end of the interview, I happen to offer, you don't have to make it this obvious, because it's in a follow-up email and all the rest of it, but it's literally like, I have this program. I also do the one-to-one coaching. I have the course. I do the whatever. This is the suite of products that you offer to solve this particular problem to this specific niche within the niche within the niche.
Absolutely. Right, we'll do one more quick fire question. We also had one from lovely Ali, who's another one of our Pod School Pro members, but that was all about how to secure PR, which I think should be an episode on itself. So Ali, if you're listening to this episode, we're going to go into that in a whole different episode.
With a PR expert, potentially.
With a PR expert, absolutely.
Which is not you.
It is not me. Hey, I'll have you know that I used to be in charge of Nando's table sauces when they first went into retail. So, I was a very small cog in a very, very big machine, but never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Right, here's our final question from listener James Martin.
Hi, JB. Been following you for years. Could you just let us know how long a podcast has got to be? Is there an optimal time that we should spend on the airwaves, getting our listeners all groovied up to listen to forever for us? Or is there a short time to make it snappy and happy? By the way, this is James Martin.
Well, I would say if it's content of James Burt that you're listening to, James Martin, then it would like to be as short as possible.
The less, the better. The less, the better. Hello, good grammar today. The least, the better. Yeah, it depends. Again, unfortunately, this is often the answer on this podcast. It depends on what does podcast success look like. Joe Rogan has made a name for himself doing 3, 4, 5 hour interviews. Jocko Willink, sometimes he talks about military history for like 6, 7 hours. It's unbelievable. And he's got a huge audience for it. But equally, if you're trying to give practical, tactical advice, guidance, information that is going to convert people across to going, that guy's an expert.
Like this podcast.
We generally haven't gone over 25, 30 minutes, even when we've done subjects as broad as sponsorship. We could talk about like this Q&A episode, for example, could easily be an hour and a half. We could go on and on and on. But it doesn't fulfill the ultimate goal that we've got for the content, so we won't do it. It should be as long as it's interesting. And it also ticks the box of the goal that you're trying to create for your listening audience. Again, go into the conversation with the thinking of what is in it for them, what is in it for that listening audience.
And what I would say as well, it comes back to Johnny.
Oh, not Johnny again.
Johnny, as in Johnny is our ideal podcast listener avatar.
I don't know if that episode ever got aired because we just laughed for 15 minutes.
That one?
So yeah, I think it was that one. So
damn it.
we did a whole episode which we had to can in the end because Alex went down a weird tangent with a random guy called Johnny. It was very strange. Maybe we'll put it in an outtakes. Go click the link in the show notes. We'll put it in Pod School for you.
Maybe we will.
Maybe.
But for me, this question comes down to, if you've done the exercise that we've given you in our free course in Pod School or in the course of the course of the course in Pod School Pro, which comes down to, literally an exercise of working out who is your dream listener avatar for your podcast. And it's like, what are they doing when they are consuming your content? And when they are consuming your content, how long is that task that they're doing? For example, are they in the car for 6 hours like I was today? Or are they walking the poodle for 7.5 minutes down the end of the lane and back again?
Not a euphemism. Just to reiterate, not a euphemism. Yeah. How long does that task take? And it sounds really weird. Go and check it out, by the way. Click the link in the show notes. Pod School has got this exercise. There's a dream listener exercise that we've done in the first week of the training, which you can get for absolutely for free. And there's a download that accompanies that, which will break down, and it's a training that you did, a training video, which is who is that exact ideal person you're trying to speak to, and then how do you craft and create content that speaks exactly to that audience.
Exactly that.
And also, like, if you're still unsure, if you're ever doing content, you're like, well, this is boring, the audience will be bored as well. If you're ever doing an interview and it's wrapping up, the shortest interview I've ever done was like 28 minutes. It was a newbie startup founders. They'd only been literally interviewed them on day one. They didn't have a lot to talk about because obviously it's day one. They're a little bit nervous. I was like, well, this needs wrapping up now. And equally, I've done conversations that have gone on for like 2.5, 3 hours, which have covered, days. It feels like days sometimes. But yeah, as long as it's interesting, if you're interested, your audience will be interested. And ultimately, as Al just said a minute ago, it's got to be the length of time that's still going to enable you to tick the box of what they are actually coming to that podcast for.
Yeah.
You've got to deliver on a promise. You're promising great content. You're not normally asking people to part with money for your content, but you are asking them to part with their time, and that's even more valuable.
Agreed.
Right, if you have enjoyed this episode, please feel free to give us a 5-star review. We've had a bunch of 5-star reviews recently, so thank you very much for that. We massively appreciate it. If you are somebody, which I guess you most likely are because you're listening to this podcast, if you're someone who is looking to start, grow, and monetize their podcast, we've got a free course for you. Click the link in the show notes now, or click the link in the description if you're watching on YouTube, and you can come and join Pod School for free of charge. It's over on Alex Hormozzi's school platform. It's got a great community in there. People asking really, really good questions. There's great content all the time. We do webinars, Q&As, and all that kind of good stuff. There's a full training package if you need the full training, etc., etc. But from me and from the Podpreneur, Mr. Alex Chisnall, thank you for your cheers for your ears. Thanks for your attention. We hope that you've enjoyed the last 27 and a bit minutes of this conversation, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode, which, by the way, is only going to be in a few days' time because we're putting 2 out a week, which was your idea.
Was it?
I'm bloody exhausted, me. See you on the next one. Ta-da.